Okay, greetings, brethren. Thanks for joining us here with Shepherd's Voice magazine on YouTube. Let's get started. So this recording is being done just before during the Feast of Tabernacles, before I guess you call it something. I understand there's different names for it, but the last great day. This is like the last great day of the feast, or the 8th day of the feast, or the 7th feast of the Holy Day calendar. And so we'll just leave it at that. But my wife Kim and I, we were in Colorado Springs this year. We got back last night, and we kept the feast with them. We arrived on Friday, and then we joined them at their facility in Colorado Springs on Friday night for kind of a Feast of Tabernacles opener. And so that was, very pleasurable. And there were some people there I've been wanting to meet for some time, because I joined them in their weekly, for the most part, their weekly Bible studies on Tuesday night. If anybody's interested in joining that, just let me know and I can get you connected. And so that was a pleasant experience. Now, with the Church of God Seventh Day, they are obviously a Sabbath day organization, but they don't have a mandate or some kind of doctrinal position on keeping the annual holy days. They do keep a kind of Passover or communion. But they also they observe many things that we're familiar with in terms of baptism, again communion, and the Sabbath day. But it's not particularly mandated on that the holy days are to be observed in regards to salvation, and so I'm okay with all of that. But some of them are, but they don't preach against it. They don't have any position against it in terms of what their mandate is. And so many of the brethren there, they keep the holy days, and that facility was being used to observe it such. So we got invited and an opportunity to speak there a little bit, and so I appreciate it. So Kim and I went there, and we rented an Airbnb. We got back yesterday. I wanted to come back here and record this, but we had a great experience with them, and so there were some activities. Got to know some people in person that I have not, were in Zoom for a year, 2 years, and you finally get to meet some people. That's a great thing. So we had some activities there and some fellowship, and so that was good. And so on the first day of the feast, it happened to coincide with the Sabbath, so we had plenty of people there, and some people from out of town. So it was Colorado Springs, and then some people from Denver came in, so I was able to meet a number of people, and it was all good, and so I appreciated that. Now on the Friday night, like it was like the greet. It's not like sort of a meet and greet, but it was sort of like a get together and the opening of the feast, and we had people on Zoom, where people can kind of have a meeting together, and so there was ourselves there in person and people on Zoom, and there was just some discussions and some introductory comments, and so that was good. And I saw the opportunity to bring up something there that I feel has been kind of a theme for me this season, maybe for you as well, about victory. So I brought up how the holy days and the Sabbath speak to victory. It's not just rest, among other things, like the Sabbath, but victory. And I've reflected upon it, and Darren just recently reflected upon it again, so I'm going to reflect on it again. But it's kind of a theme here that I want to keep going. And that victory is God's victory over chaos. And, we read the account in Genesis that the earth was without form and void, and there was confusion, as they say, tohu and bohu, and there was darkness. But then God brought in light and order, and among other things. And the Sabbath was the crowning victory over all of this during the creation narrative? And some people call it the recreation narrative. It doesn't really matter. It's the creation narrative where God speaks to where the Sabbath speaks to his victory, where he rested in it personally. And the holy days speak to victory as well, all of them. They speak to victory, God's victory. And we join him in this victory. So I brought that up there, and it was well received, because typically it's not talked about or not fully understood. So that was discussed. And a couple days later, we had a message on Zoom that was being presented, and there was a fellow in Chile, and he was giving the message, and it was done through I believe the congregation in California was the West Coast Church of God. And these are folks that are holding on to the core belief system that they were taught many, many years ago, and that's fine. And the host of the Seventh-day Church of God had a long-term relationship with them since they were young. So this was a presentation that was put together, and so Kim and I were there, and we listened. We went to the facility and watched the presentation. And I want to talk about that presentation a little bit as a lead into what I really want to say. And I think that's fair. And I think I do want to share some of the thoughts that this presenter prepared for the brethren, because I thought they were quite insightful and kind of along my line of reasoning, if you will. So he started out talking about, I'm really condensing things here. The presenter on the Zoom presentation talking about the question, Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson is a well-known name now. He's a Canadian psychologist, psychoanalyst up in Canada, and so he's become quite well known, and he speaks to a good element of society. And he asked a published Christian author a question, and it sort of picked up where my current theme this fall season. The question was, what does Christian victory look like to you? This is what Jordan Peterson asked this author. And so his name is Eric Metaxas. He's got a couple books out there, but he's got one in particular. But the question was, what does Christian victory look like to you? Fair question. The answer was one, he gave the answer that was one that comes from a position of what I would call, and if you've listened to me for a while, or Darren for a while, or others, or Alex, a position of domesticated Christian thought. Something that was domesticated. That America basically needs to come under the control of Christian thought. That it needs to go back to some kind of Christian roots. It needs to go back to some Christian authority, some biblical authority. That this is what America needs to do. Now, the author, the person he was interviewing, wrote a book called "The Letter to the American Church." The Letter to the American Church. And this book urges Christians to fight against different ideologies that are been floating around and coming more and more present in our modern society, whether it's Marxist ideology, abortion, or same-sex marriages and these kinds of things, gender identities, race theories, other rights-oriented organizations, and other government policies that apparently, according to the author here, threatens religious liberty. And so this Metaxas guy, this is his last name. I don't think I have his first name here, but handy. He feels that he wants to. What his motivation is to motivate Christian pastors to raise their voices and lead their members in political activism. So, the answer to Jordan Peter's question was based on America becoming more Christian or coming back to some kind of Christian roots. I don't know. I don't want to particularly characterize it as such, but it was a rather, what I would call a domesticated, kind of subject to some sort of national identity issues, or bringing the message down to preserving society in a way that seems more ideal to what they believe is biblically based. And so this is what I got. Now, it would be unfair of me to create some sort of generalization to say that mainstream is altogether would agree with him. That somehow America as a nation needs to become more Christian based. Like give up what's going on right now and fight and speak up against these kinds of things. It would be unfair for me to say that. And it would be unfair to me to say that the Sabbatarian movement, the Church of God, okay, is or is not domesticated either, although plenty of it is. And I think this really lands in a way, interestingly to me, this is the last day of the feast, the last great day of the feast, where all things culminate, as far as we know, as far as God has revealed. And in terms of what God has revealed, there's always progressive revelation when you start from Adam and Eve, and you keep going from the future, you keep going through different generations, you go through Israel, you go through the Church of God, and through even up through the millennium, there's going to be still progressive revelation that we still haven't understood. But I think it's like worth taking a look at where we are right now and understand where we are, and making sure with what God has taught us that we are on the right track. We are able to take with whatever God has revealed to us and walk in the right direction. So I'm kind of capturing all this together in kind of a condensed form. So I don't want to generalize things. I don't want to look at this group or that group or the other and say, well, this is mainstream, that's all domesticated, they're all wrong. It's not for me to go and do. But for the most part, I recognize the behaviors and attitudes and teachings of the Sabbatarian community, those that I'm most personally connected with. Not me personally, but I look at others I don't even know, and I'm like, what are you teaching, and what are you being taught? So there's parts, yes, indeed, of the Church of God, the Sabbath Day Church of God, Holy Day Church of God, Holy Day Observing Church of God that has very much become domesticated, worrying about the rights and privileges of whatever the Constitution, what man-made Constitution or laws have given them, and they fight for them. Also worrying about the morals of the world, the moral behavior of the world at large. But that's not particularly the calling of God's people. So we need to be careful of that. So if somebody were to say to me, what does victory say to you? I am not going down that direction. That's foreign to me. And it should be foreign to you too, to think that we're going to change society here and bring America back to some godly roots, or Canada, or wherever. That's not the calling. Yet that seems to prevail in some underlying extent. So we need to be careful of that. Worrying about the welfare of the nation. Now I know people personally. They have an internet presence more greater than this one because they're more apt in this thing, and I hope they consider me still friends. I still do as well, but they took pride in their YouTube presentations that they got suspended because they got involved in these societal welfare issues. They got involved in the things I talked about here, same-sex marriages. They got involved in talking too much about critical race theory and other things. And they took pride in the fact that they were banned or suspended on YouTube because it violated their conduct of behavior, on YouTube's conduct of behavior. Now, I'm careful bringing up these terms because I'm not here to judge these things one way or the other. But this was they felt it was part of their mandate. That they felt that America or Canada or the Western nations, based on the background of Anglo-Israelism, that somehow big part of the message was to portray or to give, cry aloud, spare not, tell the nation their sins, or be a watchman, or something to that effect. Some weird combination of what they think the message was about. So they took pride in the fact that they were being suspended. But I would take no pride in that at all, because that's not the gospel message of the kingdom of God. That is not it at all. And so they conflate certain messages of the Psalms and the prophets into what the Christ gospel is about. It's about reconciliation, amnesty, bringing this to people and not being judged. Going out and talking, condemning the nation or condemning societal behavior is not really going to really help the cause. So, we're talking about victory, but everything I just talked about now is about victory. What? So what I'm going to ask this question, and the same question was this presenter brought up about what Jordan Peterson asked this gentleman. Metaxas, his first name kind of alleviates me right now, but what does Christian victory look like to you? The same question goes to you and I on this last great day. The last day of the feast, or the feast plus one, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to go into those discussions. What is Christian victory look like to you? And how much does it align with God's? And I'm not saying that it doesn't, or probably doesn't, or anything like that. This is not a critical or a critique of our beliefs or anything like that. But these are good, challenging questions to ask ourselves. So again, what does Christian victory look like to you? What does it look like to you? And how much does it align with God's victory? Let's talk about that. And this pastor who gave the message down in Chile, okay, it was a live message he was actually down in Chile. I spoke with an English accent, and I don't have his name handy, but that's okay. He did a discussion that looked at this query question in a very helpful way, and I appreciate what he was doing. And he defined it in terms of surrender. That's good. I liked it. He defined it in terms as surrender. And he threw in some challenge or two into his presentation. And I like challenges. Instead of just me coming here and just presenting something to you like rote ROTE, just kind of giving you the same spiel. It's like, let's just challenge where we're at right now, not somebody else. It's no point for me to come up here on this message and say, look at so and so here. They just have never been challenged. They're wrong. This, that. But you're right. You're right. You've been right all along. You've always been right. No. Maybe you've been wrong quite a bit. Maybe I've been wrong quite a bit. And I think we need to challenge ourselves this way. I'm totally on board with the fact that we need to be challenged. And so he brought in a challenge or two in his message, and I was like, I like this. I like what he was doing. But he discussed the need to surrender to Christ. Victory must come in terms of surrender, is what he did, as I think what he was doing. And he mentioned some interesting points on Christ's victory, which is key to what we are all involved in here. We're involved in something very personal. We're involved in something that needs to happen, and it's been defined by God. So what he did, and with some PowerPoint presentation, I'm really condensing maybe an hour or so of message here before we go into what I want to add to this, or spin off to. But he spoke in terms of how in Roman times, all the victors, the victory of the Roman Empire, those they conquered over the many decades that they were in power. When the victor wins, he enslaves those he defeated, which is true. And you can look at the history. When you're victorious, you get enslaved. When the victors win, they enslave those who they are victorious over. Now, Alexander the Great had a little bit of a different opinion on that, and I've talked about that before, but he was kind of advanced in this thinking, but that's typically the case. And so, but they became defeated, and they became slaves unto death. So you have the victors, they get the king or they get the ruler, and then they become slaves, and all those that are under them become slaves unto death. But that is also relevant, say, in even modern times, in World War I, in World War II. Nothing's really changed that much. We'll talk about that, what happened after World War II. Germany became basically slaves to the Western powers, but that's Treaty of Versailles. I mean, it really set the stage for World War II. But I'm not an authority on all this, but this is really, really a big part of the problem. So this is not just something that goes back to Roman times. It still happens today. I don't want to get into too much into that because it kind of takes us away from the main point of what I want to drive to. So the thing is, though, here's the important thing, and this is what this presenter talked about, and I think we know this, whereas the Christian's victory, Christ's victory over us, when we surrender to him, we become slaves as well, but slaves unto life. Not unto death, slaves unto life. And if we look at Paul's writings, for example, he really understood and picked up on this. And when we look at Paul's writings, which are not too unfamiliar to us, which we're not going to go into detail with this, but he saw himself as he saw his brethren, as he would see us today, as slaves unto life. Not unto death, but slaves unto life. And Paul actually uses Roman analogies to get his point across. Some certain analogies that he's using, but the victor gets the spoils. And he decides where the spoils are going to go to. And I think this is an important distinction about how Christ and our life in Christ is about, as opposed to life in enslavement, which is in the world. Because Christ says, I come to set you free. And it's sort of like a contradiction. It almost doesn't make sense. But you'll be slaves unto me, but I've set you free. Because I've set you free unto life. Not unto death, but unto life. All right. And one of the points he made, as he was wrapping up in his presentation, PowerPoints and things like that, and all these sorts of things, he made the statement that to the degree we see, and here's the thing that I found rather interesting. To the degree we see the church, okay, the church of God, as you have experienced it and know it and have been around it, to the degree we can see the church as a presentation of victory, relates to our personal degree of surrender. That's my takeaway. That is my takeaway. And he threw that out there as a challenge for us. He threw that as a challenge. I was like, I like that. I like the fact that you bring out a challenge for someone. You just confront maybe certain thinking, just to confront us a little bit. So I want to repeat that. As he was wrapping up here, he made the statement that to the degree we see the church as the church as you experienced it, as a presentation of victory, relates to our own personal degree of surrender to Jesus Christ. That is, that the church is an expression of victory, the ecclesia. I know some people don't like the word church because it kind of conflates a lot of different terminology and all this kind of thing. Let's just say the called out ones, the assembly of God, to try to generalize it to the most acceptable way we can, as an expression of victory. Now, what do you think about that? I thought it was interesting. And as I was processing these things in my notes, as I was typing away, working on the computer, trying to pull these things, some thoughts together, as I saw this as a lead-in to what I want to talk about even now, even though I'm still talking about the background. If we're down in the dumps, down in the dumps, the expression, we're all down in the dumps about church. And I get there. I get all down in the dumps too. I got it. Okay? I admit that, I feel disparaged or despondent at times, and, and it's best to come out here and admit it and talk to God about it and talk to brethren about it and just hold it within myself. But yeah, I understand that. If you're down in the dumps about all the churches, maybe we should think about that. Because despite everything, Paul said, after all what he's experienced, what he was put through, and Christ made it a point, says, I will show him all the things he must suffer for my name's sake, for the kingdom of God's sake. Okay? Despite everything, Paul did say the church was a pillar of truth to Timothy, the foundation. Despite everything that he went through, despite all the conflicts and all the corrections he went through with many of the congregations and all these things, whether it's Galatia, that area, southern Turkey of Galatia, or anything like that, what all he went to, he says, to Paul, was a pillar in the ground of truth. He never let that go. And neither should we. We don't want that, because it's still an expression of victory. So I've had to kind of pull back a little bit and kind of think about this. Just thinking about this. What is my degree of surrender? To the point where I say, if I believe that the church is an expression of God's victory, and if I take objection to that, no, the church is not an expression of God's victory at all. It's just a beat up old institution. I heard a prayer the other day. It was one of the prayers was like, "Oh, the church is getting older." No, stop, knock it off. Knock it off with the church is getting older. Knock it off with that stuff. Every time I just cringe when I hear that. It's exclusivism. You know, I understand it. I know where somebody's coming from. But if you have said that or believe that or talk that way, just don't get offended. Pull back on that comment and stop talking that way. Because it really doesn't fare well with somebody like myself. I'm not the youngest guy in the crowd. I'm not the oldest guy. I'm somewhere in that kind of very difficult area, difficult age, but within this the modern church that I've experienced, but knock it off with the church is getting older. I didn't even want to go there with this. We got to knock this stuff off. Knock it off with this kind of language. So he made another point. We're talking about victory and surrender here. We're talking about both of these things. Right? That point showing that even though, say, in World War I don't know if there's a movie called 1917, and if you watched it, it's quite, it's not for the faint of heart. I believe I know which one he was mentioning, but 1917, this is World War I. The Germans surrendered to the West. The war was ended. But the fighting continued because not everybody understood that the word got out. Like the war was over, but the fighting continued amongst the trenches and amongst those who never got the word. And he made a point of bringing that out. Christ has won the battle. It's whether or not we've got the word. Did you catch the word that Christ has won the battle? Do we get it? Do we understand that Christ has won already? And the analogy was kind of interesting because I've seen it happen. There's stories of those in the jungle in Japan where there was a soldier, those in the armed forces of Japan under the empire wanted to remain loyal. They didn't want to desert, so they disappeared in the jungle, and they just figured the war went on for decades, and they still were fighting and doing all these things, even though the war was over for years. So they were a problem. There were skirmishes with the local people in the Philippines, wherever it was. And some of you have heard the stories, and I've read about them, and it's unbelievable how dedicated some people would be in order to fight for national interests that were long gone. And so this is what happened, is all these skirmishes that were continuing. And he made kind of a little point here that I kind of appreciated, because he says, I think he alluded to this very briefly, he didn't go into it too much, but the skirmishes we see in, say, the Church of God, as we see them, speaks to the degree of those who have not surrendered to Jesus Christ. They still want to fight. And I just, he mentioned something, I think that's what he meant. It was so brief. But I said, I think you know what he's talking about. Where these skirmishes, these protection of fiefdoms, protection of relevancy. There are ministers who want to protect their relevancy. There are those men and women who want to protect their fiefdom. Those who just want to, just do not want to, those who want to preserve their life will lose it. We need to surrender. And surrender means freedom in Christ. In the world, surrender, if you surrender to the world, that's slavery unto death. But surrender to Christ is slavery unto life, is really the point. And that's what the scriptures speak about. There's nothing new here. There's nothing new that I'm bringing out here. There's nothing new what this presenter was bringing out. This is all very true for us. The thing that I did appreciate, though, as I thought about it, as I was writing a few notes, because I want to listen to others and see what they have to say. Even though there are skirmishes, even though there are all these things that are going on that we've all experienced and I've experienced, and in some level or some depth or some very personal way, myself personally, all these things, the lack of surrender that is going on, that does not define the ecclesia. It does not define those of God. It does not define those who are in fellowship with God. It does not define the church. Because as Jesus Christ, as Paul said, the church is the pillar of truth. And a lot of times we think we go in the direction as though these skirmishes define the church. No, the victory has been done. These little skirmishes that are going on are not don't define who it is. All these false teachings and stupidity and all these things that I've talked about just moments ago, they don't define the church in terms of God's eyes. Because the church still is still an expression of God's victory. And we need to adopt that into our own thinking. If we get into things, as I've talked about earlier, the domesticated church, if we start getting domesticated, then that perhaps takes away from our recognition and our appreciation of what Christ's victory is over evil, over the devil, over the adversary. We don't want to get involved in those things. Otherwise, we will not appreciate it. And that speaks to our degree of surrender. I hope I'm coming across okay here. So when I listen to sermons, years ago, something funny was said to me. I was like, it must have been over 10 years ago, where, a fellow was saying, I really wonder what goes through the mind of a minister listening to another minister give a sermon. Like, what is he processing? As though there was some sort of disconnect between someone who is a minister, someone in the know, and someone who is not in the know. And I was like, that was a very strange comment to me. Very strange comment. And I think about this all the time. It always comes up in my mind, like, why would somebody say something like this? But, when I listen to sermons, I process things in a way that might give me ideas and thoughts for future messages. So what am I hearing that I can glean from? This is me. I can't speak for everyone, but this is how I come across in terms of what I think. Oftentimes I take a kind of spin off from there's a thread that someone is speaking to, but sometimes I see that thread and I go off and I say, I want to work with this and go off in this other direction and kind of expound and go and talk about other things to kind of capture a bigger picture, because not everyone understands things. We can't possibly cover one individual can't cover particularly all the gospel message and all that needs to be said and all that needs to be, to capture the needs of the brethren, for crying out loud. Nobody can do that. But that gives me ideas and thoughts for future messages. So oftentimes I would just say, yeah, I think I can work with something like that. I want to, build on this thinking. And sometimes I just outright object to the message, because there's things that are gone out there that I was like, no way would I ever endorse something like this. I wouldn't endorse their ministry and the person themselves or what they said. I mean, those who listen to them, that's their choice. not here to judge one or the other. But there's some things that I object to. And on this channel, unabashedly, and maybe to our own detriment, whatever, have spoken against such messages. And I will tell you this, there's one coming in the near future of a sermon which I am going to address. Not personally, I won't bring out the individual in particular, but there's some things there that we need to address. And that's coming up in the very near future. But in terms of what I heard this week, this theme of victory, and what does victory seem like to you, I want to kind of just roll back there. I want to keep on the theme of victory in terms of my own thinking. And here's where I ultimately want to go with this, in terms of looking at this day. It's a Sabbath that coincides with the last great day of the feast. Maybe some call it the 8th day, but it's the 7th day feast. Again, I'm not going to argue one way or the other. Even though Christ was and is the victor supreme, Christ, our victor supreme, even he always surrendered to his Father's will. Again, even Christ, who is our victor supreme, the one who is victorious, and in his supremacy, he always surrendered to his Father's will. Even he, our champion, our victorious Savior, surrendered to his Father's will. Wow. After all I've been talking about here, Christ himself surrendered to his Father's will. Look in the Garden of Gethsemane, and his prayer, which was recorded for us to make a point. Jesus himself, even in the most difficult state of apprehension. And I've been, even recently, I've been in a state of a lot of apprehension. Some things that some of you may personally understand, but, but Christ's most difficult state of apprehension for what he was facing, surrendered to his Father's will. He said, "Nevertheless, your will be done." This is not just words to make it all sound good. It's not a political statement. It's not a facade. This is very real. This is some very real things that he was experiencing. And you just kind of wonder the depth and the totality of this thing. And I just wow. If we appreciate it. In his last words, he said, in Luke, it's recorded here in Luke chapter 23 and verse 46. When Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. Commitment, some other translations say entrust. But you look at the Greek word here, it means for in the most personal way. Everything I've ever been since eternity, all things, everything I've done here on earth, all things I've ever been, all things that I am, everything and all things, just everything about me, everything, he put into his Father's hands. In the most personal way. And for us, there is a measure of entrusting ourselves to the Father in the same way. For with him, as is said in the scriptures, no one can snatch us out of his hands. If you go to John chapter 10, verse 27, My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they will follow me. And I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. And me and my Father are one. This is speaks to victory as well. It speaks to the victory of Jesus Christ. All right, let's keep going here. I want to make sure my notes are in order, if you don't mind. We often talk about, if we look at this, look at this last great day, is often talk about this is the last great day of the feast, or separate feast in reality, as I mentioned already. We often talk about a second resurrection of the dead. We've talked about new beginnings, among other things, and perhaps the victory of Christ over death and hell, or over the grave. In Revelation chapter 20, verse 14, and death and Hades were cast in the lake of fire. This is the second death, and anyone not found and written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This is what we talk about often in terms of this last great day of the feast. A couple of years ago I talked about the number 8, the 8th octave. And number 8 being something new, and these kinds of things, and that's important. You know, Christ himself in the parables of Matthew 13 talks about this. And if we talked about parable warning that really Darren Connery talked about, and it's in the last issue of Shepherd's Voice magazine, you can look at all the more details. And some of it is hard to accept, but I still found it hard. Still many people have found it hard to accept. But in Matthew 13, in verse 41, the Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom, which is really the hardest thing for people to accept, all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the lake of fire. All these things that offend, death, death and hell were cast in the lake of fire. Just get rid of all these negative things. It speaks to the end of the age, which this day to speak of. But I want to go here to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He's talking about the resurrection. But each one of us in his own order. Christ the first fruits, after us, this is verse 23. But each one of us in his own order, Christ the first fruits, after those who are Christ at his coming. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father. Very important point here. When he puts an end to all rule and authority and power, he puts under him. For he must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be destroyed is death. This is what he's talking about here in Matthew 13. For, quote unquote, he has put all things under his feet, quote, end quote. But when he says all things are put under him, quote unquote, right, it's difficult. It is evident that he who put all things under him is accepted. Now, all things are made subject to him. Then the Son himself will also subject him who put all things under him, that God may be in all. So Jesus Christ is doing this for the greater glory of the kingdom to the Father. This is where this is going. This is the Father's Day. I'm calling this sermon the Father's Day. Hopefully it's correct in the way I'm saying it. And when you go back to verse 43 of Matthew 13, then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who has ears to hear, let him hear. Let's hear it, brethren. He who has ears to hear, let them hear. I hope we're hearing it again. Because when verse 43 of Matthew 13, it doesn't talk about Christ handing things over to the Father, but it aligns totally with this. The righteous will shine forth the kingdom of their Father, because Jesus Christ has handed it over to him. He subjected himself to them. He subjected himself and surrendered everything to him. To life. Not to death, but to life. Paul again reflects upon this and the totality of it all in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 9. It's I think this section of verses kind of helps capture it to us as well, because we're talking big picture here, but we need a big picture to understand our little picture, because sometimes we get a little bit too wrapped up in our little pictures. Philippians chapter 2 and starting here verse 9. Therefore God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus Christ every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth, and of those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. To drive the point home, Christ will surrender the kingdom over to the Father. He's surrendering onto life, even himself, but not as one who is defeated. For he is surrendering to life. He's not one who is defeated. He actually is the victor, surrendering even to the Father, if you can consider it. This means a wonderful life for himself, Jesus Christ, a wonderful life for himself, having defeated all evil and corruption, and for the sake of a wonderful life for you and me. And that's what eternity speaks to. While I was in Colorado Springs in a public place, we were doing some, fellowship get-togethers, and having some lunches and things. I can't remember exactly when. I kind of looked around and looked at everyone. I looked at families. I looked at people and selves, and it was kind of like, I kind of get into this mode, and I said, it's the last thing in people's mind. And this is not a criticism. It's just sort of an observation that I've had to think about internally. The last thing I've had to realize in the kingdom. Looked around and realized the kingdom being handed over to the Father at the end of the millennium, at the end of the age, is really the last thing on people's mind. It's not really what they feel their needs are about. And I get that. There are people going about their lives, they're raising children and taking care of their needs, and God gets all that. God gets all that. The Father sees all this. He brings rain on the good and the evil, and, he knows what's going on. But ultimately, if you look at the chapters in Revelation, where is this all going to go? There's so much something greater than this, and all the fuss that we do. And, we're going about our lives. People are going about their lives, doing the things they need to do and enjoy, or up to the good, and maybe sometimes they're up to some mischief, or whatever. But it's not nothing about everything everybody wakes up in the morning and goes to, or watches the news, or whatever news, or whatever political persuasion you have, or what channels you watch, if anything at all, or what phone you got. It's not really focused on the kingdom being handed over to God the Father. And this just kind of like encroaches in our lives all the time. And I get that. You know, with that, the feasts, particularly this last day of the feast, gives us a chance to maybe perceive it somehow, though. Give it a chance to appreciate that. Tomorrow we're going to carry on, after we're going to carry on. We're going to go through winter, and then we're going to repeat these cycles, and we're going to do Sabbath after Sabbath, and we're going to do all these things. But I want us to continue to think about God's victory, even though it doesn't even look like it. God, He's not saying, I'm not here about appearances. I'm here. That appearance was going to come, and there'll be no question about it. But right now, we need to resemble that appearance before it comes. But, we have a chance to perceive it somehow right now in this discussion. I hope I'm properly sharing this, because we're here. I guess my job here is to try to speak truth and speak freedom and speak victory to all of us all the time. And even though we see through the glass darkly, it might make all the difference for us to capture this. I love and amazed. I just love and I'm amazed with the inclusiveness of God to those who surrender to His victory. We need to surrender to His victory. And don't you feel the same way? Don't you feel the same way? When you surrender to His victory, how appreciative it is to be inclusive, to be included into life. Because God did not create us onto subjugation. He didn't create us just to be pushed down or slaved. He didn't do this. He created us for Himself, for His victory, and we need to grasp that victory to the best of our ability now. And we may not be able to do a good job of it, but some job of it we can. We can do this. It's going to be a joy. There's going to be a joy, even though we may have difficulty realizing now. But it is a joy today, and will be surely to be a joy in the future, especially if we've surrendered to God now. We want to surrender to Him. So, brethren, I think I've said enough. I have some more notes here I want to talk about. I'm going to save them maybe for another presentation, because sometimes I take notes and I move them down, and then they get cut off, and I kind of put them on the cutting board, and they may be used later. So, brethren, I'm going to sign off now. I hope this presentation was meaningful to you. It's meaningful to me to present it. And I thank you for joining us here on this Sabbath day for the premiere that it's been coming out on. So God bless all of you on this fall holiday season. I hope it's been meaningful. It's been meaningful to me. And God bless all of you. We'll see you here again next time on Shepherd's Voice Magazine on YouTube. Till then, take care.